Hello and welcome back to another episode of JPod, Jefferson School District's very own podcast. I'm your host, Superintendent Brad Capener, and I'm joined once again by my two co-hosts, Chris Shaw and Becca Mallory. Good morning, guys. How are you today?
Good morning. Feeling fabulous. Glad it's Friday.
Doing great.
Nice fall day. Our podcast, as everyone knows, is designed to strengthen the connection between our community and our schools. We talk about events coming up, we describe programs so you're well aware of how they function. We interview students, and sometimes we interview teachers, like today, so on various topics. But I'm really excited about our conversation today because we're here at Jefferson Elementary School talking with Principal Chris Sullivan, kindergarten teacher Miss Withee, and Miss Rosenbaum, one of our wonderful first grade teachers. Good morning, guys. Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
Morning. It's a glorious Friday.
It is. And we're talking today about literacy and what you can do at home to help support the instruction and learning happening in the classroom. So this is a pretty cool subject. Folks, we know the importance of learning to read and comprehend and to be solid readers by third grade. As we mentioned in our previous literacy podcast, kindergarten through second grade, students are learning to read. And beginning in third grade, students are now reading to learn. And as reading becomes more challenging as they get older, their success in school will largely depend on their ability to read at grade level. So, students who struggle with reading in fourth and fifth grade can also be impacted in middle school and high school, and this can affect students' self-esteem and it can affect their grades. So, in short, learning to read in the primary years is really important. And we have an outstanding staff that works really hard to get all of our students where they need to be. My guests today are going to be helping to talk about, again, what can happen at home to help support some of the work that they're doing in the classroom. So now to my guests, can we begin by talking about what pre-reading skills and other student skills you might want to see in kindergarten as students come to you at the beginning of the year? Like, what would you like to see as students walk in?
Oh, many experiences with books. It's important for children to be read to and to hold books in their hands, learn to turn pages.
But like the print from one, like left to right, that kind of thing, tracking?
Tracking, yes, left to right. Identifying how many words are in a sentence, identifying first sounds that they're hearing that their grown-ups read to them.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of reading from parents. So, I mean, so it's, you're with little ones, 3, 4, or 5-year-olds. Having mom or dad sitting there and actually just reading on it, like a nightly basis or every day?
That would be wonderful if we could get that. Yes, many reading skills begin before children even see print. Okay. They need to hear the different sounds in words. Mm-hmm. And so whenever you're reading to children, if you sit close to them, close to their ear, and close to their shoulder, and they're hearing those words, and the pronunciations correctly, then it's going to help them later on with their reading skills once they start associating sounds with letters. But before they even do that, we want them hearing the different sounds and words.
Okay, so you can actually see the difference. Like, students that have been read to and have some of this, as they come into the classroom, you can tell that they've had this exposure?
Yes, 100%. And if they are turning pages correctly, if they're holding the book correctly, and turning the pages and understanding how that process works also, it's huge for children.
It's so funny that you say that because I read with my 2-year-old almost every night. And it did definitely start with being able to hold the book. And when she would hold the book upside down or she would turn 3 or 4 pages at a time, those are like the small, simple skills. But now we've reached a point where she says, Mommy, I read the book tonight. And she'll read the book and she makes up the whole thing. But her inflection is so matching the tone of like how I read the story, like the rhyming, and you can hear her get the emotions like I do. She thinks she's reading the words on the page. She's 2 years old, so I don't expect her to actually read them. But I agree, like that. Those are like the basic skills. Like, what is a book and how do you read it?
And we call that retelling, which is important for children to be able to do also. before they're reading the print, the actual print, that they can retell the story that was just read to them.
So it seems really simple, right? It just seems, I mean, you don't really necessarily know when you're sitting there just reading a book to a child that this is actually helping them become readers.
Yes.
It's just, and actually, the idea of just holding a book and flipping pages is helpful to the classroom as well.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's super important.
And the love of reading. I mean, if you don't have a love for reading, then getting them to read is like pulling teeth. You have to have a little bit of passion, a little bit of excitement when you pick up a book. Otherwise, it's like, oh, here we go. I mean, to be honest, I'm like that with college books, right? Because that's what it trained me. I'd pick up a college book, and they were so boring that now I have a really hard time picking up a book for like entertainment and joy, because unless it's a kindergarten book, because let's be honest, those are fun. But yeah, I feel like we have to build that love for reading as well.
And using the voices for the different characters.
Yep.
Children love that. And honestly, we've had fifth graders come visit kindergarten, and they will always ask for Elephant and Piggy.
Yep.
Elephant and Piggy have a voice, and they love that.
Yeah.
And it brings the books to life, and it encourages kids when they come to school. It makes them eager and excited to read. They want to see what books we have in our classroom. They want to see what books we have in our library. And it just helps driving their interest towards reading altogether.
Interesting. So have you seen a difference? Like, I guess my experience, did you guys know I taught kindergarten for a year?
No.
Awesome. Everyone should teach kindergarten for a year.
Right?
I agree. First step in getting into teaching.
But this was a while ago, okay? And so when I was doing a kindergarten class, there wasn't a whole lot of literacy. It was a lot of cooperative play, and I mean, there was literacy, but it was not. Today, when I walk into classrooms, I'm seeing a lot of literacy, whereas before maybe not so much. And that was in the 90s. So, have you also seen a shift and a change, or as teachers, over the time, to be more and more, literacy focused, or?
Yes, definitely. Even from 10 years ago, there's a huge difference. And so that makes our task a little bit harder, because we want to have classrooms full of joy, and we want it to be fun.
Yep.
But there's also some pretty important skills that we have to teach these kids before they move on. So trying to balance that is a really tricky job, and it can be exhausting sometimes. But our job is to encourage children to love school.
Right.
And so, but there's important work at the same time. So trying to get all of those things covered is a pretty big undertaking. And our kindergarten kids work so hard. They're doing it with fun and love and joy, but they are also working incredibly hard. And once you can see them developing their skills more, the look on their face is completely different. They're so proud. They're so full of happiness, and they want everyone to know what they're doing. So oftentimes we'll grab another adult if they happen to come through and say, oh, this child wants to read to you, or this child wants to demonstrate that they can write their letters properly, that they can write their name. Watch this. This is so cool. And then luckily, our adults around our building will encourage the children, give them feedback, and make them feel very proud. We want them to feel proud of themselves.
Absolutely. Well, I would imagine that stamina grows as the year grows. Right? Like when you first get your kinders in, being able to sit all day in school is probably kind of a challenge, I would imagine.
Yes.
Well, I mean, for some of these kids, that's their first interaction with the social world. Like, some of these kids have been at home with mom or dad or grandma, grandpa, and not around other kids. So, like, not just the stamina, but, like, being able to share, being able to take turns, understanding that it's not all about you.
Exactly. And I was kind of getting to my next question, which is, what would you like to see, what would be helpful for parents in getting so some of those, not necessarily literacy skills, but just how to do school skills? Is there anything that they can do at home that might help you in that way?
Practicing some social groups before you get to school, birthday parties, clubs, that kind of thing, interaction with other children, taking turns, playing board games, reading to your children. Problem solving.
Activities with fine motor, gross motor, just to help support them in that way too.
Yeah, sometimes this leads into first grade. Like, you spend all year trying to get those social skills down, and sometimes that summer break, they get that break where it's not with a lot of other kids their age again, and then they come back to first grade and you're like, okay, let's start over.
Yeah.
What are some good examples of activities for like fine motor versus gross motor skills that parents could do at home?
Cutting,
question.
writing, like
Holding a pencil.
Holding a pencil. That
Counting
helps a lot.
1 to 1
Yep.
with pennies, paper clips, anything like that.
There's just so many games. I think that's the one thing that people forget is that we hand iPads, we hand screens to kids and like, oh, it's an educational game, but it's not a cooperative game. It's not interactive with another person. So they don't learn how to take turns. They don't learn how to lose a
Right.
game
That's what I was
with another
thinking.
person. And
Accepting
How to
failure.
problem
yeah,
solve.
and how to problem solve that. And some of those things even have fine motor skills attached to them as well. So, I think sometimes we overthink it's like, oh, we have to have this educational game. It's like, whatever, Chutes and Ladders, think what Candyland is not a highly educational game, but you are learning to take turns, and then you're having conversations with somebody. So these are really easy things parents can do that are actually fun.
I
But
mean-
it's taking the screen.
Yeah.
If I could have parents do anything is not think that screen is doing really any good. It's an entertainment piece, but all the
not
education stuff, it is not actually teaching skills. I taught kindergarten, but it was about, 17, 18 years ago, and we were not working on concepts of print at the same levels we are now, like where kids come in and they don't know how to hold a book, they haven't seen books, they don't understand that it's communication,
They don't know how to write their name.
they don't know how to write their name, they don't
Or
know how to
spell
hold a
their name.
pencil, that they, like, we've seen this too, I mean, everyone here, where they come in and they've seen scissors for the first time, and they're just
Yeah.
trying to figure out how that works. And so what parents could really be doing is if kids come in with that preparation, then we can take off from there. So it's not really that the bar has gone any higher. I would just say kids used to come in having more experience with books, having more experience with outdoor play, having more cooperative experiences. Now parents have to kind of get their kids off the iPad and actually get their kids outside.
And I just wanted to add too, kind of in support of that, and something that you had mentioned earlier too, Brad, with the change in expectations for kindergarten and first grade too, is attendance is so important because
Oh, yeah.
a lot of people, think like, oh, a long time ago, when I was in kindergarten, there was a lot of play and there was a lot of things like that and
Nap
puzzles
time.
Nap
and
time.
nap time. But attendance with, the literacy skills we're talking about here and the things you can do at home in addition to what takes place at school is when those 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds are missing school, whether it's consistent or inconsistently, they are missing all of the activities, the lessons, the repetition that we're doing to build the foundational skills for them to be able to read and write.
Yeah.
That's
makes
a really
big
good point. I'm really glad you brought that up because we don't talk about attendance enough. And you don't necessarily know or think about what you just said, the impact of being here on a daily basis and what impact that has on the child to learn and to get into those routines and have those expectations. That's really a good point to bring out. Well, let's switch from kindergarten now. Let's go up into first and second grade because now they've had a year of school. Now they're coming into first. They're learning to read, and they're in a little different place than they were coming into from preschool. So if they've had preschool. So what are some of the things as teachers, like what would you guys like to see parents helping out in first, second grade? What does that look like? Is it different?
Yeah, so we just sent home to our first grade families last week a sheet with our high frequency words or our sight words that we've been practicing in first grade. And on the back, we put some suggestions for parents on ways that they can practice these words with their kids. And some of these things look like if you have resources at home like a whiteboard or a chalkboard, the parent writing the word and the kids reading it, or vice versa. The kids going over the word and spelling it too. You also can do things like on your counter or in a baking sheet if you have flour or salt or sugar, pouring things like that, and then they are using their finger to trace these words. That's also a really good fine motor activity too.
With proper letter formation.
Yes, with
starting
proper
at
letter
the top.
formation. Yes,
That's huge.
I always start my letters at the top, is what we say, because as soon as kids are writing and they're using incorrect letter formation, it is incredibly difficult to reverse because it's muscle memory. So we spend a lot of time in first grade in our small groups, our small reading groups, whole learning time, recorrecting students that are that maybe, I mean, if you can tell if they have nice handwriting, you might think that their letters must be formed correctly. They look so nice, I can read their writing. But oftentimes, if you're not truly watching and paying attention, they're forming the letters wrong. And if you're ever...
Sorry, go ahead.
If you're ever wanting, additional resources, I'll send home sheets if parents want them, or, if it's something we've talked about at conferences. That just is a tracing sheet that shows where you're starting for each letter. And that can be really, really helpful too.
And writing correlates directly with reading. So a lot of the times when kids are writing from the bottom up or from the right to the left, their reading skills will tend to follow that. And you have to remind them, like, we write the same way that we read, from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, from the left side to the right side. That's the same way we write, is from top to bottom, left to right. And so they correlate very well together, having to make sure they're like, it sounds really silly. Who cares if my kid writes from the bottom up? Like, yeah, but that can correlate to low reading scores or challenging with like understanding what they're reading, because they're having to really focus on how they read and not so much of what they're reading, especially when they get older.
And when they're trying to form those letters and they're forming them incorrectly every time, you can see the children, they will pause in their writing to try to remember how to make this letter. So if they do it consistently the school way, is what we call it, or the proper way, it does not take as much energy, and their writing they will become writers much faster.
That's right. I remember when I was teaching first grade, it was interesting when kids would start to write a sentence, and then all of a sudden it would just completely change topics, and you realize like, oh, they've been focusing so much on like the word itself that they forgot what they're writing about.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about everything that you're saying. If you had students that were behind, like they just didn't for whatever reasons, right? They didn't have. Let's say they didn't go to kindergarten, and they come to you in first grade. How do you get a class and everyone's kind of on, all right, we're all going to be doing this, thinking that everyone has their name and knows how to write their letters, to maybe some students who don't have those skills? How do you catch those kids up?
I'd say a big piece of that is our small group reading time that we do, or like additional reading intervention. I know last year we would do some double dosing and things like that. That's just us taking extra time during the day to go over these skills with students. And sometimes, it does take additional time on our end to make sure we have that time set aside in addition to whole group learning. Because if you have students that are having those missing pieces and those missing holes in their learning, and you sit them down whole class and you're teaching something that they do not understand, they're not going to pick it up right away. Oftentimes they need one-on-one practice, whether it's letter sounds, letter identification, forming letters, things like that, how to hold their pencil, how to write their name, how to identify how many words in a sentence, things like that.
And we go through a lot of sticky notes, because as we're roaming around our classroom watching the children, we're taking notes constantly so that we can remember which children we need to check back in with. And we want to make sure that they're practicing correctly all the time rather than incorrectly. So we move a lot. We use a lot of sticky notes, and we move a lot, and we keep tabs on their progression. And if they're really struggling, then we can see that. But some kids are really good at hiding it, so you have to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And check in all the time.
Yeah, that typical, if they're misbehaving, it's because they're behind, doesn't always work. Sometimes it's the sweetest kids that you have that you're like, whoa, wait a second, you didn't catch what I was teaching.
And they're trying.
Yeah.
They're trying
They
really,
want
really
to.
hard. Yeah.
But they just have some missing gaps that need to be filled in.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. I think really helpful too, and I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your day teaching to be able to come and talk to us and help us with this really important. I think that sometimes it feels like a mystery. Like, you send your child to school and they come back reading, but how does that all happen, right? And you guys are doing so much and it's really neat to be able to hear how you deconstruct that and some of what they need.
That'd be okay. I just wanted to add also that it's really important when you're talking to your children to look at them. So whenever they're watching you speak, they can see how your mouth is forming those sounds. We noticed after COVID, and we were all wearing masks,
Oh, interesting.
when the kids took the masks off, they hadn't seen how people were forming the letters with their mouth, forming the sounds. And so it's really important when you're speaking to your child to look at them so they can see the proper formation. And you don't have to point it out necessarily, but
But I think like tying directly in with that is listening to the way they say it. Because if you catch
Yeah.
them saying a word with an R and it's supposed to be a W, just being able to like correct that so that it doesn't become a habit of the way that they say it forever.
We haven't really talked about or thought about the impact of COVID, on our learning, and the idea of the mask and not being able to read. That's just a really interesting point that I haven't really thought about. It's just how much kids, and I guess as a group of educators, how we've learned from this about the importance of just kids seeing you speak and learning sounds based off that. That's really interesting. Well, we have to wrap this up today, and I wanted to thank you so much again for being here. Rachel, I need to apologize. I called you by your maiden name.
That's
and
okay.
You just recently got married, so
I did.
Congratulations,
Thank you.
Miss Garrison.
Thank you.
So I apologize about that, but thank you
both
for
are
joining
great
us.
names.
Yes. Principal Sullivan, thank you for having us over today at your school. It's always a pleasure to be here at Jefferson Elementary School. Until next week, everybody, have a great week. We'll see you next time.
See you next
Bye.
time.
Thank you.